What are human rights? Human rights are the basic rights and freedom that belongs to every person in the world, from birth until death. It begins with the right to live and follows with right that makes life worth living, such as rights to food, education, work, health, and liberty. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948, was the first legal document to set out the foundational human rights to be universally protected. Its adaptation recognized human rights to be the foundation for freedom, justice, and peace after the World War II. All countries try to support and also promote legal documents around the world. There are so many different religions, languages, perspectives, countries, and communities around the world. People are different and they differ in their expressions, beliefs, interests, personalities, and a lot more. We are all human, being in different bodies. We are different and really unique, but in the end, we are all the same and living on the same planet as one big community. However, sometimes people are too different and things change. Human rights violations are threatening actions against other human rights. In total, there were 1,105 cases in 2021 of human rights being violated all across the countries that signed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Already this year, in 2022, there are 7,150 applications about the violence of human rights from different states. Most communities fear their government and cannot stand up for their rights. They choose to be quiet and go along with the problem. Not all governments understood what they signed and closed their eyes to cases that are really important. People live in fear, violence, and pretend that everything is okay. But is it the correct way to live? This is one of the cases where victims of human rights violations stood up for themselves and sent an application to the court about their case on May 14, 2010, Toronto. Ms. Demrade and Mr. Gill immigrated to Canada from India. They identify as Singh and their first language is Punjabi. Ms. Demrade began working for the corporation with Mr. Gill in 2000s. They both worked as assembly, packing and machine operators. The applicants were told by their employer that they should speak English, not Punjabi, during their lunchtime. They both filled human rights applications after they were terminated. Violated right involves the Human Rights Code RSO 1990. Every person has a right to equal treatment with respect to service, goods and facilities. And every person who is an employee has a right to freedom from harassment in the workplace by their employer. The problem of the first applicant, Mr. Gill, is that he was discriminated against his race and the language he speaks. The problem of the second applicant, Mrs. Stairs, is that she fired Mr. Gill because of downsizing in 2009. Who is right in this particular situation? Mr. Gill explains that they were subjected to others, subjected to more security than non-racialized employees. Also, they were isolated in the workplace and humiliated when Mrs. Stairs made comments about their use of Punjabi during their lunch hours. Mrs. Demrade adds that Mrs. Stairs did not point out their language just once, but several times. Denise Stairs answers that other workers were complaining about Punjabi language as being really loud. That is why she was telling Mr. Gill to talk in English. However, Mr. Shrank never heard anyone complaining about other workers speaking different languages. Moreover, Mrs. Stairs could not or did not want to identify who and when complained to her about Mr. Gill. Therefore, the court can see that Mrs. Stairs had something against Mr. Gill's language. Denise Stairs continues that in early 2009, in response to a very significant downturn in business, the corporation responded to reduce its workforces. The point of the layoff was strictly based on a seniority system. Mr. Gill answers that he could not understand Mrs. Stairs' decision in these circumstances because they were not only had more seniority than all of the other coworkers, but also had an excellent history of work performance. Therefore, this point of the layoff decision in 2009 was strictly based on a seniority system, but Mrs. Stairs fired applicants according to her own system. Denise Stairs adds that Mr. Gill and other Indian workers were not testified for the certain level of English language to communicate with customers. However, Mr. Gill was working as assembly, packing and machine operator. Therefore, the court denies this argument because office skills were not reasonably required for all remaining employees. Denise Stairs also fails in the company holding because the corporate respondents production manager and the general manager met annually with each applicant to conduct a performance review. For every year they were employed and applicants were receiving their salary. However, there was no written record of discipline of either applicant. Indian workers were not even remaining as employees at the factory. Mrs. Stairs refuses to talk about this fact. The judge had few hours to read all the arguments again and then came up with the order. Therefore, language is not a protected ground in the code, although it can be an indicator of discrimination based on race, ethnicity and place of origin. Punjabi is Mr. Gill's first language. Therefore, he has the right to express himself with his language during non-working hours, like lunchtime. Mrs. Stairs has failed to establish a reasonable and non-discriminatory basis of her selection for layoff. Therefore, the determination of both employees was in the branch of the code. Human rights damage award for injury to dignity, feelings and self-respect includes recognition for the essential values of the right to be free from discrimination. The tribunal has the power to order financial compensation for injury to dignity, feelings and self-respect. One of the successful courts that protects refugees from violence and discrimination. However, escaping conflicts and discrimination, many people live with nothing but the clothes they're wearing. The global displacement crisis deals with conflict, violence, poverty and hunger. Refugees and migrants are ordinary people who have been forced to cross boundaries and borders in search of safety for their families. It's difficult to find a good job for immigrants because their human rights are violated all the time. There are a lot of human rights articles that talk about the right to free movement for a job, to social security, education, expression, religion, nationality, and the most important is right to be equal. But unfortunately, not all of these articles are being used to help refugees. The United Nations General Assembly approved the Global Pact on Refugees, a framework for more predictable and equitable responsibility sharing, recognizing that a sustainable solution to refugee situation cannot be achieved without international cooperation. More than 160 governments signed the document to help displaced people to recreate their lives again. You never know what will happen tomorrow, and you should always think what will be in the future. If today you have family, money, and a house, anything can happen. You can lose everything you had yesterday. If you ever were discriminating others, be ready to be discriminated against later on. Or do you want to change something now?